welcome everybody to sunny Wellington, to Island Bay School. Today, thank you for coming and joining us today for our webinar on privacy for schools. We're really excited to be part of the Privacy Week program. Happy Privacy Week to everybody. Thanks very much for tuning in. My name's Lee Patton. I am a privacy consultant. I've been working out of the advice workshop for the past 3 years. Before that, I had a career in the public sector. I've been doing privacy stuff since I was abruptly chucked into it as the privacy officer of the Earthquake Commission back in 2013, when we had quite a significant privacy breach, and all of a sudden I had to learn very quickly how to put in place a privacy program and help to improve how an entire business improves how it manages personal information. So I'll shortly run through how we're going to structure this presentation. But first, I'd just like to ask Chrissy and Jackie to introduce themselves as well. So my co-panelists today, Chrissy.
Kia ora koutou. Yeah, I'm Chrissy Jameson. I'm a lawyer, but I don't specialise in privacy law. I am a board trustee at Island Bay School, a parent board trustee. Kia ora, everyone.
Kia ora koutou. My name is Jackie Innes. I'm one of the deputy principals at Island Bay School and have been part of our evolving privacy journey over the last couple of years, working alongside Lee and our Board of Trustees, as well as our wider staff. So thanks for tuning in. Might just start us off with a karakia, and then I'll hand back over to Lee to get things started. Whakataka te hau ki te uru, whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā, kina kina ki uta, kia mā, tara tara ki tai, e hiaka ana te atakura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, te hei Māori ora.
Cool, thanks Jackie. Cool, so today we're going to talk about the experience that the Island Bay School has been through, their sort of journey, putting in place some new rules, new way of doing things around privacy. I should have mentioned before that I'm also an Island Bay School parent, so I'm that parent that has a little bit of knowledge, and when stuff comes back from the school, I start asking some questions, and so that's how things initiated with us. But the way that we're going to structure it today, I'm going to just cover off some of the privacy basics, some of the things that we see as challenges for schools that are somewhat unique, or they've got a unique aspect to it. So some of the things that make schools a little bit different, and then just introduce sort of how we've gone about making it work in a way that really reflects privacy best practice. So good practice privacy, and things that we would be putting in place for some of our clients in, say, the banking sector or with government departments. But how do we do that in a school situation, and what does that look like? Then we've got Chrissy sort of having a look at or providing that sort of board lens, then what is the governance requirements and what's the role that the Board of Trustees can play. And then Jackie, who's really going to give us the sort of where the rubber hits the road, provide what the school leadership has done, and some of the challenges and issues that they've worked through, just so that you've got an idea of how it sort of really works on the day-to-day as well. All of those sorts of little war stories are really useful for these kinds of conversations. We've got loads of time for questions at the end, so please chuck any questions you've got. If there's a topic that we haven't covered a lot of and you're more interested in, throw that into the chat so that we know. And if there's something that you have got an issue or something that you want to explore further, then throw that in there too. We will be sharing the slides because I've got a little bit of resources, links to sort of resources that I might refer to in this presentation that we've got provided for you too. So we'll see what we can do about making sure that we've got those slides available. Cool. So some of the things that we've kind of called the basics, things to be aware of and to know about. So one of the challenges or sort of misinformation that often comes up in the privacy world is that anything that's public is privacy doesn't apply. Well, actually, the Privacy Act applies to any personal information, which is anything about an identifiable individual. So as soon as you've got any sort of stuff that you've collected about someone, even if it's something as public as, you know, your name or something like that, then you've still got obligations and responsibilities to look after it well. And the Privacy Act and the requirements in the Privacy Act apply. The Privacy Act is built around these information privacy principles, and there's 13 principles, and they really reflect the rules for managing personal information and maintaining privacy. So they're the things that you need to comply with. They are really flexible because they are principles, and because they do provide a lot of exceptions, and we'll talk about that in a second. There is a lot of scope for an agency or a school in this context to set the rules and explain how they are going to manage personal information themselves. So we'll cover that off a little bit when we talk about collection statements. But it's really important to know too that the privacy principles cover requirements for collecting information, rules around how you can use it, requirements to make sure it's accurate and you keep it up to date. I've missed off here that it's really important to provide people with access when they ask for it, and even what you're meant to do when you delete it, so how long you can keep stuff for. There, as I said before, all of these principles generally come with like these rules, general rules, and then there are exceptions that apply. So for example, one of the disclosure rule, the general rule, is that you can't share the information that you collect to any other person unless one of the exceptions apply. Now, some of the big, more important exceptions that are really useful. One is where the person agrees, so they consent to that sharing happening. That is probably your number one exception to be relying on and to use. The other one is where you tell people that this is what you're collecting the information for. So in a school context, you're telling people that you're collecting this information, enrollment information, and it has to go to the Ministry of Education. So you're sharing it with them. So that's an example of that applying. There's also exceptions around disclosing to others to make sure that we are keeping people safe. And there's also a provision in there to be able to use personal information for research. Cool. And the other thing too is that every agency must have a privacy officer. So that includes every school must have their own privacy officer. And that's important because they should be the go-to person around privacy for the school. They should be able to answer any questions. They should be able to explain the policies and provide you with those. And they're the sort of the central node that you should be organizing this around. One of the, well, sorry, just one last point on that basics. Sometimes this surprises a lot of people, but it's the Privacy Act is really built around individuals and really trying to get the individuals to have the ability to control the information about them. One of the interesting things about the Act is that it doesn't have any age thresholds. So this applies to any person of any age. So any child has their own privacy rights, and that I think needs to be understood as this, so that you can manage the privacy of children well who are in the school. Cool, thanks, Jackie. Noting that, some of the challenges that do arise and with privacy in schools, and some of these are actually quite generic that we see quite often. The issues around consent, what are people consenting for, who can consent. That's something that other agencies face and other businesses face. But in a school context, who can consent is quite an interesting question. You have kids of certain ages, who won't have the capability or capacity to consent. That changes as they get older and they can understand and make decisions for themselves more. So your the sort of the school context, depending if you're a primary school, intermediate, secondary, and as kids go through those through that growth, that kind of constantly changes who should be considered as able to consent, and then the question around what needs consent and what should be consented to. Jumping onto some of the things like technology, the use of online learning and applications and databases and things. Again, the ability of people to access technology and to use them and to use different tools that are available presents challenges in a school context when you've got the teachers able to download an app on a Sunday night to use on a Monday with their kids for learning opportunities. Like, that's exciting, but it also raises challenges around who are you giving the information to, where is it kept, what information is being shared, and who else is using that information. So I know that Jackie will have a little look at what they've been doing around the sort of third-party apps and things like that. And the other thing too around sort of transparency and notice and information sharing. So one of the challenging areas that we often face, and one of the things that raises challenging complaints and breaches that we see, are those sort of different family dynamics that you can get, where sometimes they're really positive and sometimes they're quite negative, difficult ones. Sometimes where, what's the right word here? Not hard to define, but how different families want to share information amongst the broader family and how wide that goes is another aspect to be considering as well. Cool. And then, so with all of these sorts of aspects, we came to Island Bay and looked to set up an ecosystem or an environment where we can really promote privacy, and we can really align our privacy practices with the strategy and direction of the school, so that we could really sort of make it part of how we do things. So we put together this little approach, I guess, which really was a way of highlighting who are we involving in these conversations, what sort of things do we need to have, and how do we make this in order to make this work. We've obviously identified the Board of Trustees as a really key group of people who both reflect the community but also set the direction for the school, and can provide, I guess, the parameters for how things should be done. And these are set through some really clear policies and guidelines. One of the things to note here is that there's no real right answer or right way of doing any of these things. What we've tried to do here is to sort of move away from we've got a very legalistic, compliance-focused privacy policy and approach to something that's a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more active, involves the community a bit more, and sort of actively gets people talking about this stuff. Your privacy policy doesn't have to have all of the answers, but it should provide you with a way of figuring out any answers to questions or working through problems and coming up with some good solutions there. Some of the important things from a leadership perspective that you should be having in place are some procedures around collecting information and collecting the consent. So understanding what the parameters are for use of the information, being really clear on what you are going to be getting from people, and making sure that you're minimizing that to only what you need. Should have a process that sets out how you respond to requests for access to information. So that's people asking for various records, and also asking for things to be corrected. And then something to support the staff around making reports of concern, how to report to the ministry properly, so putting in place those sort of good controls and procedures, and how to approve new systems that personal information will be going on, particularly around information around children. Any good program or privacy program should have training provided to the people who need to use it. So it's no point having a policy that no one knows is there or no one understands. So making sure that you're raising awareness with staff members, teachers, admin staff, anyone who's touching personal information, involved with personal information in the school. And make sure that they understand what their roles and responsibilities are. Really important to highlight when things go wrong and make that a thing that people feel comfortable raising and talking about and saying, hey, this has happened, and let's figure out how we respond to this. So any breaches should be reported and escalated. This becomes important when we're talking about notifiable breaches, which is any breach that has the potential to cause significant harm to any individual. Those need to be reported to the Office of the Privacy Commissioner. They also need to be reported to, or the person who's affected needs to be told as well that that's occurred. And that needs to happen. The expectation is that that happens within 72 hours. So that's quite a quick time frame. Once you've realized that this has happened, it's quite a quick turnaround to make sure that you're notifying properly. So from a leadership perspective, those are the things that you're sort of looking to have in place, those kind of policies, those procedures. Make sure you've got good training, you've got really good communication and links to your community, to parents, to caregivers, to anyone who's a stakeholder or involved. And that you are also providing your community with really good information. So having a good collection statement, which explains what you collect, where it goes, what your sort of rules are around, around CCTV use or something like that. So you're really taking an effort to explain that and communicating and engaging. And that includes with the children who are in your care, who use information you're collecting from. So this was something that I saw come home from school, and I thought, actually, this is a really good example of a school trying to, or communicating the privacy stuff to their community, to their kids. So the one thing I really liked about this is that it was part of the activity. So it was a bit of information about how this information was going to be used. And in this case, it was a video that was being uploaded. So a little bit of information about the activity, explaining the privacy part, not overly technical. It's really age appropriate. It's nice and engaging for kids. It's brilliant that it's been put in succinctly and included in like a little speech bubble. But it's really covered off some of the major things. It's saying, what are we collecting? Where is it going? What are we doing with it at the end? And if you're really and also who has access to it. So you've got only people with the link review. So those are sort of the main things that you cover off in a collection statement anyway. And what this highlights is that you don't need to do it in an overly technical way. You don't need to chuck it up on your website as as a big set of terms and conditions that you've got to agree to. It's a really good the communication around what you're doing with people's information can be short, sharp. It's even better if you're doing it at the point you're collecting it, and you're really engaging in a conversation with people around what you're doing with their information. And I know Jackie's going to be talking a bit about some of that later on. So with that, I'll pass it over.
Kia ora, everyone. Yeah, as I said, I'm on the board. So I'm on the board at Island Bay School. And I just wanted to speak about our experience having gone through a review. from a board's perspective. So I'm not sure of the attendees of this webinar, but I guess Jackie will speak more to the principals and teaching educators, and hopefully I have some information for the board members. So I'll just start, Jackie, with that next slide. I just have 3 slides to share, all quite simple. The next one is just a little summary, thanks, of the legal framework that boards operated in. So members will be aware of this, obviously, but the board, of course, is the legal entity that governs the school. And so with that comes that legal responsibility. So as a board, we obviously need to make sure that the school's meeting its privacy obligations, and any complaint, for example, to the Office of the Privacy Commissioner will fall back on the board to respond to. So the school needs to comply with the Privacy Act. And I know that sounds obvious, but I guess when we went through our review process, we realised that complying is sort of much more than just having consents in place or tick boxes on enrolment forms, or making sure that a photo of a particular child, consent is obtained to that before it appears in a newsletter, for example. But it's more engaging, so that management knows what the board's expectations are with regards to privacy, and setting what we term a risk appetite. Because ultimately it falls back on the board. So the board needs to set that tone, and know that those privacy principles of 13 that Lee was talking about are being weighed up and applied by management. And so with that comes, the staff training, teaching and educating and engaging, the students on those issues, like the diagram that we looked at earlier, having the conversations with families, and then looking through those various online platforms or teaching aids where information is stored. And Jackie goes, we'll talk about the detail of that. So I guess what I'm saying from a board's perspective, that in a way what we've realised is that effectively treating the issue of privacy like we would health and safety or finance, so that we sort of have where are we at, what's happening, what are the risks, what can we do better, treating privacy in that same way, with that same governance lens, I guess. And then the other important piece of legislation, of course, is the Education and Training Act, and it's for the 4 objectives there. And we can see that privacy interfaces with each of those objectives. For us at Island Bay Schools, I guess student achievement is the one that stands out to us, because every school has its strategic plan and its charter, and for us, creating inquisitive learners, that are apt and ready for future jobs, is important. So technology is an important part of the learning at our school. Every school is obviously going to be different there, but a large part of our review therefore covered how we protect children's personal information, yet safely embrace technology and aspects of online learning at the same time. So striking that balance. On the next slide there, I just set some bullet points, I guess, and just the key areas of our review. So this is what we did as a board. So the review sort of came about at the end of 2020, and it was a result of some queries from parents, and also the coming into force of the Privacy Act 2020. And as a board, we were fortunate enough to have Lee Patton as a parent of our school, who obviously is an expert in privacy law. So we were able to engage him to help us carry out, I guess I'd call it a self-review. So we looked at what we as a school were doing to comply with the new Act, and also it sort of sparked a review of all of our processes and procedures. So yeah, seeking advice from Lee, I guess, was the first step. And out of that, the first main job for us really as a board was to set the risk appetite. So this was a process where we had discussions at a board meeting about what level of risk as far as privacy was the board willing to take on. And to engage us in that, we circulated a questionnaire to board members. There are about 20 questions in it, and asked for them to rate questions in a certain way, just to gauge that appetite for risk as privacy goes. And I thought I'd just pick out 3 of them, for example, so just to give a bit of meat to it and to give a bit of flavour. But one of the questions, for example, was, where do you think the school should be in terms of adopting and using new technologies? And members were asked to rate that from 1 to 10, 1 being first users or 10 being adopt only when absolutely certain. Another question, for example, was, how much resource do you think the school should allocate to ensuring privacy is always maintained? So a real question that goes to the nuts and bolts of how valuable is this to you? How much of the school's budget are we going to set aside for this? Another question was, all information at the school should be held. Sorry, all information the school has should be held in New Zealand. So a question about the servers where data is being stored, and again, asked to agree or disagree on a scale with that. So that just gives a little bit of flavour as to how we went about discussing, bringing that conversation to the board table and discussing to set that risk appetite. Because of course that goes on then to inform management, the principal and senior leadership, how they will then implement the actual procedures and policies. Another part of our review involved training. So the staff, teachers, and in fact all employees of the school went through the Privacy ABC for Schools, and many of us board members did too. So coming up to speed, I guess, with privacy, and they're free, and it's an online tool, obviously. Privacy 101, there's an ABC, and then an ABC specifically for schools, which is a good course. Then we carried a review of our privacy policies. We, as a school, use School Docs, which is a policy platform. We still had a couple of policies that were our own, but we went through those in detail. And then finally, we're on Lee's advice, creating or amending or updating our 4 key documents, I guess, that the school has now with regards to privacy. So it's the collection statement. So what how we advise parents and children what information we're collecting, how we're storing it, and of course the all-important use for that information. The consent process, so that's when new families enrol, and Jackie can talk more about this in detail, but these 4 documents we essentially created through our review. The digital citizenship agreements on agreement between whānau and the school about digital use, and one for staff as well. So that was the review that we carried out, and then we reported back to the board a few meetings later. And then my last slide there, that last one, thanks Jackie, is just how we as a board now see our role going forward, because I think having carried out the review, we see privacy in a different light, as I mentioned earlier, not just a tick box. So now going forward, obtaining assurances. So our role is, we see now, to obtain assurances, we've got every 6 months. So we have a board work plan. I'm sure all boards do, but on our board work plan now, every 6 months, we have an assurance that we seek from the principal as to that the privacy policies and procedures are being followed. Also, any risks or any issues that arise, that they're communicated to the board. For example, if there were to be, a complaint to OPC, more of a communication, I guess. So any issues are brought to the board's attention, and of course that staff, they're trained, are continue trained. So new staff go through that, the ABC for Schools, new board members. So just an ongoing training. Review and approve policies. So we continue to do that, and there have been changes to the Privacy Act. So checking against those. The School Docs policies, I'm sure many boards out there use School Docs, but they have just recently been updated too. Review and resetting the board's risk appetite. So that was what I explained before, our risk appetite that we give to management. So we've got it scheduled in our board work plan every 2 years to reset. Obviously board members come and go, the actual, the membership changes. So we've got it set for every 2 years, but of course it can be looked at any time if an incident should arise, for example. And then finally, I've got there, ask management to keep up to date and review those important documents, those key documents. So that's, as a board, what we did through our review, and then sort of how we see our role now. And I guess I think just the key learning I would take, just to end on this, would be what we as a board learned was that transparency is key, and communicating with the community. It's a learning journey, you know, new technologies are coming at us all the time. So as a board, being proactive and engaging with the community is key. I'll leave it there for now and hand over to you, Jackie.
Thanks, Chrissy. So what does all this look like, I guess, where the rubber hits the road in terms of the way that the school runs on the ground, for the admin team, for the leadership team, for anyone employed by Island-based school, and for our students? So as was mentioned at the start, a bit of the journey for us. So Lee connected with me in about August of 2020 when we had been updating our digital citizenship student use agreement, and obviously the Privacy Act was going to be coming into play in December of that year. So one of the things for us, or an awareness, we've always used quite a lot of digital technology within the school and have always been quite proactive with having both a staff use and a student use agreement. But one of the things that conversation highlighted was our transparency around thinking and processes that we had in place to analyse and review tools or digital environments that we were using and placing our children in, and making it clear how we were assessing the suitability of different tools, and knowing what those tools and technologies might be doing with our information, what information they were collecting, etc. So that's sort of where we sort of launched from. As Chrissy mentioned, from in the background, the board were doing their self-review. We, as part of that process, as a staff, we looked at what tools and technologies particularly are we using across the school, right from things like our student management system, things that help our admin team run, tools and technologies that were on, as part of classroom practice or the design of learning. So things such as what apps were on our school issued iPads, what web tools might teachers be using, what are we signing up for? So that was quite a process, because obviously for some school-wide stuff, we had real clarity around that. But for, like Lee mentioned earlier, if a classroom teacher had found a really cool tool to use and to support their maths learning and was signing up, we didn't really have full picture on that. So that was a really important part of that process. Also getting us to think about what information we collect when we do things like Google Forms. For example, we run something called Freedom Friday, where the children sign up for a range of different options that they take part in. And it was even thinking about what questions we ask of them when we're collecting those surveys. So again, an awareness for us. And one of the big light bulb moments going through this process was, obviously we'd come out of our first lockdown, and as part of getting learning up and running from a distance learning perspective, one of the things we'd done is we had signed up for a tool that provided reading material. And so it was called Wooshka. We hadn't informed whānau that we were going to be doing it. We hadn't sought permission. We had seen an opportunity, and in our haste, we had signed up for it and provided a CSV of the information it needed to be able to get that. Now, all good intentions, but if we were to go back and do that again, we would definitely be doing it differently. Also mentioned, so beginning of 2021, all staff employed by the school went through their ABCs training. And that did get us thinking about things that were non-digital as well. So off-the-cuff conversations with parents, the way that sharing of learning for individual children might be, conversations about behaviour, that sort of thing. So that course is really good because it gives really practical, tangible examples. So obviously, the board were refining and amending the policies. And so a big part of that, which the leadership team has spent considerable time looking at, was the privacy collection statement. So being clear about what our purpose is, what we're collecting, why we're collecting information, where that information goes, and trying to make it digestible for people to read, but also comprehensive enough that we as educators understand our obligations in terms of protecting children's privacy, as well as staff privacy as well. So our privacy collection statement, we've got, when we talk about the third party providers, we sort of organized it according to tools that we use to run the school, and things that we have to be able to use. So for example, the use of Enroll, a use of our student management system, that type of thing. And then we've got it broken down into tools and technologies that we use for staff, and then those that are used through the design of learning, which have got a particular focus on student information. So like I just said, it was it took a while to ascertain what across the school we were using, and then going onto those third-party websites, seeing if we could get privacy policies to download, requesting them when we couldn't easily find those privacy policies, and looking at, so third-party providers, for example, our school photographers, the people that come in and obviously take photos of all of our children, and then have that stored, the children's images stored on their website for parents to be able to log in and order photos of their children. Things like Seesaw, which we use for reporting and documentation of learning. Things like Study Ladder, which we use for supporting maths teaching. Kahoot, playing fun online quizzes, that sort of thing. So it took quite a long time to get all of that information. And then, of course, the next step was understanding that information. Some of the privacy policies we encountered were written in a really digestible, easy to understand way for teachers. Others were a little bit more complex. And so connecting back with Lee around what some of that means, becoming familiar with things like Google Analytics, that sort of thing, because we run a Google Apps for Education environment at school. And so then we followed a process to complete a risk analysis. I've got a picture on the next slide, for each of the third-party app or tool or service that we were using, which outlined a whole lot of things like what the terms and conditions were, who the administrators were, what information they collected, what was input in order to sign up for that service, etc. And then through doing that, we looked at which ones we would continue using and which ones were not necessarily, they didn't fit with what that risk appetite was and what our privacy collection statement outlined. One of the big things, and out of that initial conversation with Lee, was understanding where data is stored. So understanding where servers are and what that means in terms of legal ramifications if something goes wrong. So where possible, we have requested our data to be stored in countries whose laws align more with New Zealand laws. There is a fancy phrase for that, and I can't remember what it is. And so, for example, Seesaw, we were able to shift our data being stored through the US to being housed in servers that are in Australia. For tools or services where we felt that a lot of personal information was being stored or housed, such as Seesaw, our student management system, or Vimeo, which is a video platform, we're going through a detailed risk analysis, which we've used a framework similar to the new EOTC guidelines of looking at the level of risk and what we're doing to mitigate risk for the use of that information, and where we can modify information instead of full surname, for example, maybe putting last initial or using other codes that make it less identifiable. And And then once that all happened, our privacy collection statement, we aligned all of the fields in that to our enrolment form. And so when new families enroll, they've got access to all the key documents that Chrissy talked about. And also we ask a range of questions. Some is a general waiver at like informing people as to what we're using information for example, the student management system reporting to enroll, and others it was asking for consent. Consent for the sharing of learning and consent for the sharing of image across a different range of different sources. And so then we obviously needed to update because a lot of our information was out of date. Maybe it was quite minimal. I think when some children enrolled, for some it was empty, the line about whether image could be used. So we were relying a lot on assumption. And so we did a complete school-wide survey for every single child. Interestingly, for us, not every family had the same response for every child. So if they had 3 children at our school, in some cases, they were okay with their child's image being used in the newsletter, for example, but not another child. And in talking to whānau, for some it was a child's choice. For others, it was to do with perhaps custody situations that were different for different siblings in the family. And for other families, it was to do with the age of their child and what part of the school they were in. So one of the things that our principal and myself did is we made personal phone calls to every single person who had indicated they were not comfortable with an aspect of the day-to-day runnings of the school type privacy questions. And then we had to talk them through some of that information. And we also made phone conversations to parents that had said they were not comfortable with a third party. But of course, that has ramifications for design of learning and teaching and learning in the classroom. So we followed that up with just ensuring that everybody knew what that meant. In some cases, parents had just seen the words third party and they hadn't necessarily looked at the privacy collection statement and seen which ones we were referring to. And when they're like, oh no, I'm fine with study ladder, or I'm absolutely okay with, whichever other one it was. So we got that, we sent the collection statement to them via email and got their change via in writing. Also connected to this, our principal has changed the permissions levels for different staff within our student management system. We use Hero, and that's quite good because there can be different levels of information that different people have access to. And we also underwent some training with a person who specializes in internet security, and our staff are now all using a tool called Bitwarden for password security. And also an ongoing conversation is around the use of staff personal devices such as phones for taking photos, obviously capturing learning in action. And as part of that, we provided school issued devices to all of our support staff, which we hadn't prior. They'd often been having to use personal devices. This is just a diagram, which is just one of the digital safety management plans that we have undertaken. And this is the one that we've done for Seesaw. It's obviously linked to the policies, who is going to be the users of that particular tool. Are there any restrictions? What's our sort of educative purpose for using it? Who will be the administrators? And how long do we foresee that needs to be used? And then that gets signed off once that's complete. So obviously it's been a big journey, and definitely despite the journey and the incredible support from Lee and our board, don't necessarily feel like a privacy expert, but definitely have an awareness of the importance of privacy and the type of questions we need to be asking and the things as a school we need to be thinking about in regards to privacy. In terms of some things that we know we need to refine or where to next. So I think that example of we don't want the privacy is incredibly important, but we also want our teachers to be innovative and, finding tools and technologies that may support their teaching in a really positive way. So we don't want that to inhibit their teaching, but also we want to make sure that, just jumping on and signing up for something, that our teachers have an awareness of thinking about privacy, as well as that we've got a process to follow for, the study ladder type apps of the world. We're becoming more aware of what to look for in privacy policies, but some of that can be quite obscure, and definitely it's definitely a journey that we're on, and I think reaching out for support is really important with that one. And we can have all the information and connected to parents' wishes for their children, or different privacy considerations we need to be making, but we need to make sure that we've got that constant awareness. So an example of children's images in the newsletter, making sure that all stakeholders that have access to their images are aware of who's got the consent and who has not, because I think that keeping that staff awareness keeps privacy in the forefront, whilst still being able to do our job, which is enriching children's lives with powerful teaching and learning experiences. And that's all from me. Thanks. I'll pass it back to you, Lee.
Oh, yeah, thank you. I was going to say, we've had quite a few questions come up, and I've been frantically trying to tap away and answer some of them, but a few more for us to answer in real life. And the first one I'm going to ask you, Chrissy. So if you could, it's really about the sort of risk appetite. And the question was, how does a board define its appetite while remaining within the requirements of the legislation? And I just wonder if you could talk about how you've gone about what sort of things you've addressed with your risk appetite, how you've kind of written those, or
yeah, sure. No, it's a great question. I think I really do think it will be different for every school, and that's the beauty of the setup of boards, isn't it? So obviously you have to act within within the law, but yeah, it's how those privacy principles are balanced. So, for example, I gave 3 examples from our questionnaire that we sent out to the board members. If I hone in on one of those by way of an example, which is the serving of the storage of data, so data being served in New Zealand as opposed to elsewhere. Yeah, as long as, you can have, so the new Act gives details about, legislation must be, equivalent to New Zealand in the host country where the data is being stored. But even that, like even Australia, the law isn't the same. It isn't the same Privacy Act that we have. So we were gauging interest there, and there was a difference. So it just prompted a discussion at our board meeting about that. And I think through, I think some the more you know about technology and the way it works, or where data is stored, perhaps the more or less comfortable you are. But so one board member, for example, or something was reluctant to any data being stored offshore. I think for us having that discussion, and we were lucky enough to have Jackie, I think, in that meeting, and so yeah, just having that discussion, I guess, and we were able to arrive at a consensus on most of those questions in the survey we sent out, and arrive at a concise risk appetite that we're then able to pass to management. I hope that answered the question.
Thanks, Chrissy. That's useful. Now, Jackie, I'm going to ask this one of you. So one of the questions is, what is your sense of the levels of general privacy awareness or concern amongst parents and students?
Say that one more time.
So what is your sense of the levels of general privacy awareness or concern amongst parents and students?
So for us, it's really varied. So we've got a lot of our parents that probably in terms of their work have come across or we're aware of a lot to do with the changes in the Privacy Act, but also, I think over the last few years, there's been some documentaries that have highlighted the importance of protecting your own information, your own personal information, your own privacy, and that filters down to some of our students. But in saying that, there's real confidence in some of the processes and procedures we've got at school, knowing the feedback we've had from parents has been, through the phone conversations, as well as we always ask for questions or comments when we do a survey like that. And so a lot just really saying, thank you. It's really good to be thinking about this sort of thing. Some highlighting things like with historic data that we've got. So we used to have student blogs through a blogger platform, and they still obviously exist. So thinking about how long something is live for was a question that came out a lot from several parents. I think around our children, so we run, it's different, but we run, we've got quite a comprehensive digital citizenship program, but making children aware of the importance of their information and what they're sharing online. So I think that the digital citizenship agreement is geared to having conversations at home, which raises awareness as well. In terms of across the whole school, where we get where there's quite a divide with our community is around things like their child's image on social media. So whether it goes onto the school Facebook page or not, whether their name is okay to be in the newsletter, but not their image, or so for that, we've got quite a continuum of those that are happy for everything and those that are a bit more cautious when it comes to, I guess, the bigger giants like Facebook and what they know about that and their children's information. And then obviously individual circumstances, so families where they have to be really careful if there is sort of protection orders in place or anything like that, that means that the way in which they protect their children's privacy differs from, if they don't have that consideration to think about.
Yeah, I'm going to add to that and just say that the awareness around privacy is growing and it's emerging. I think the understanding of what it means is developing as well. And interestingly, some of the research that's been coming out, like the sort of the growing population that are quite concerned about privacy and quite familiar with that kind of concept of trading off personal information for privacy, etc., and for getting benefits from it, are those younger people and those people who are or have been brought up in a much more digital world than some of us, if we can say that.
And I think that was the important part for us. Part of the process was the phone conversations we had with people that were, I guess, on the fence when it came to third party, because we outlined really specifically in our collection statement what we were meaning when we were referring to third party providers and the ones that we'd done the analysis for. And I think people hear the words third party and think, oh, definitely not. But equally, we're really happy with using Seesaw for everything, which is a third-party provider. So I think that provided some clarity for those families. They had an awareness, but maybe hadn't dived into the details of our collection statement, which I think is, people are busy. It's expected.
Yep. So one of the questions here is that schools are now a common target for ransomware and cyber extortion. As part of a privacy program, does this include regular reviews on technical controls that are in place to protect personal information? Yes, it should be part of a program. The key question here is how often? It's definitely an emerging risk, and it's something that people should be aware of. That security piece, you can't have good privacy without good security. So that's a really essential component. It's really going to be a question of balancing your resources. When do you do what? How important is this? How does this fit within your risk profile? And deciding on what controls you do have in place. That's going to be different for the different types of schools that are around and the different systems that are being used. But definitely ensuring that you are that you're protecting that information at all times is really important and vital. All right. So we've also got another one here. Last question. And maybe this is you, Jackie. I was wondering how you're assessing privacy policies of free software, which is linked to personal data collection and profiling of users' children for advertising commercial reasons. How do you see that in the context of privacy risks? And do you require parental consent before using such tools? So maybe that's also something for Chrissy to comment on as well, in terms of how the schools approached that kind of technology.
So some of the tools that we've had to do an analysis for are free, and some are ones that are subscription based. So we've followed the same process for all of those tools, whether they are sort of free open source software, whether they are filled with adverts, whether they are ones that we subscribe to. I think really, really important as part of that process was looking at why we were using it and what was happening with the information that we were providing. And if it was being passed on for advertising, we were not interested. And I guess that's something that we need to keep coming back to, because those conditions, I guess, can change just because you sign up for something, I don't know, in 2012 doesn't mean that's the same service that you signed up for back then. I think connected to this too was us being aware, like if it was a teacher signing up with their account, that's sort of why we went also around password security, because knowing that a lot of our staff, we've got some that still like to write things down in a notebook, or probably not on a sticky note on their computer, but we weren't far off that for some people. So making sure that that if you've signed up for I keep using Study Ladder as an example, but if you've done that with your school issued Google account, and that's the same password that you use for getting into our student management system, making sure that that's all tied together as well. I think I went a little bit off the question there, Lee.
That's all right. That's fine.
I'll just add to that, if I may, what Jackie said about third parties being able to benefit from information at the school and how that's a no-go at our school. It's a no-go because in our risk, well, the direction from the board was everybody absolutely disagreed with the with third parties being able to gain basically from information. So that was just a nice little example there of where the risk appetite informed the decision of management. Yeah.
It's a tricky one too, because I know, I mean, we've probably leaned back a lot through this process, but you know, highlighted the conversation around what's the purpose. So obviously, for the most part, we want our children using technology where they are telling the technology what to do. They are creating and designing rather than just being passive consumers of whatever it is, even though there is a space for practicing skills, but also that if a child was using something and the teacher had no oversight of that, how was that information being fed back to the teacher to help inform them in terms of their teaching and the child's, you know, sort of personal learning journey. So I think, and that's what we found some of the free software was probably doing more of, was more stuff that may be busy work rather than the stuff that the teacher had more oversight over. Of course, the flip side to that is when you have oversight over something, it probably means that children have an account. And so we've got a bit of a process for creating those accounts where the child's information is not being used in terms of first name, last name, age, etc. And we've also, we know now from the privacy collection statement that if we are to introduce something new, we would obviously be talking to parents about what that is and outlining the same as we have with the other tools, what the privacy policies are, what information we'd be sharing, and whether or not it's critical for teaching and learning. And obviously if it's not, then people have the option to opt in or opt out depending on how we frame it.
All right, thanks, Jackie. And unfortunately, as much as we'd love to stick around and talk about this for the rest of the day, all of our participants are busy people and we're turning into pumpkins because it's 4:30. Once again, thank you, Chrissy. Thank you, Jackie, for presenting this with me. Thank you very much for participating. Jackie, if you could just flick through the next one, I'm just going to do a bit of a pump for the Office of the Privacy Commissioner. They've got free e-learning modules there online, which you can go and access, including that ABC for Schools. There's the Ask Us function as well. We've shared, I think, the link to the Notify Us around notifications. Some other areas to look at for you. Some aspects from IAPP is the International Association of Privacy Professionals, and you can search their resources. That Voice the Child, some ideas for how you can actually engage with kids and discuss privacy matters with them, things with them in a way that they understand. There's a couple of links there. And also the UK has a really good code, which might give you some good information as well to use. But again, thank you very, very much for attending today and for all of your really great questions. We hope you've enjoyed this and you've got some value and some ideas out of it. And we wish you all the best with your privacy activities in the future. Thank you.
Taki te.
Taki te.